Kupiansk is experiencing a decisive moment in the conflict. After the official announcement by Russia declaring the city captured, the reality on the ground proved to be very different. Recent information indicates that the remaining Russian contingent is extremely small, with fewer than 100 soldiers still resisting. Ukrainian forces have already neutralized most of the invading troops, and the elimination of these last groups could mean the complete recapture of the city. At the same time, Ukraine has turned the surroundings of Kupiansk into a highly hostile environment for any Russian attempt at reinforcement or withdrawal. The massive use of drones and automated systems has created a constant network of surveillance and attack, forming a true gray zone of chaos that extends for about 20 kilometers from the front line and is destroying 88% of Russian forces. Now, imagine for a moment the perspective of a Russian soldier assigned to cross this zone. You know drones are in the air. At times, the distant sound reveals their presence. At others, they simply disappear among the treetops out of sight. Without any warning, a reconnaissance drone may have already identified your position, while Ukrainian operators organize a coordinated attack with FPV drones further ahead in the territory you were ordered to occupy. Even overwhelmed by fear, the advance continues, although each step is more difficult than the last. In most cases, there is no support from heavy armor, such as tanks or infantry fighting vehicles. Then, the unmistakable sound emerges, the growing buzz of an FPV drone. Even if one is avoided or shot down, others soon appear, often from different angles. At that moment, it becomes clear that every step had been observed from the very beginning. On January 20th, Russian forces launched a series of emergency offensives, with the aim of regaining some influence over Kupiansk and its surroundings. These actions sought to contain and, if possible, reverse the accumulated losses since December, when Ukrainian operations began causing significant damage to Russian positions in the region. The attacks came from multiple directions. To the north, Russian units advanced toward the area of Holubivka. Along the eastern axis, assaults were recorded toward Petropavlivka, Podoli, and Kotyurivka. From the southeast, troops attempted to approach the city from Pishany Stepova, Novoselivka, and Kurilivka in an effort to establish new positions and pressure Ukrainian defenses on multiple fronts. Russia's strategic intention is evident: to try to isolate Kupiansk through a gradual encirclement. Despite the continuation of offensive actions across several fronts, Russian forces failed to achieve any concrete progress on the ground. The explanation lies in the way Ukraine reorganized its defense around the city. Instead of relying solely on traditional troop lines, Kyiv established broad denial areas, where any enemy movement is quickly detected and attacked, making a safe approach almost impossible. At the center of this strategy is the massive use of drones, which have created what analysts are already calling the Kupiansk extermination zone. In practice, this defense functions as an aerial barrier formed by FPV drones, extending up to 25 kilometers from the front lines around Kupiansk. These unmanned systems operate continuously, creating a layer of surveillance and attack that covers vast areas around the city and prevents discrete advances by Russian forces. In addition to aerial platforms, unmanned ground systems are also being employed. Although authorities have not officially confirmed whether these robots perform support roles or offensive actions, there are clear signs that they are being used for direct attacks. In typical operational situations, several FPV drones are directed against a single target, usually 5, but sometimes reaching a dozen or more. Considering that just one is enough to neutralize a combatant, multiple drones, faster than any fleeing soldier and armed with explosives, make survival practically impossible. At the same time, this technological approach also solved the challenge Ukraine faced months earlier in Kupiansk: how to maintain control of the area with less human risk, something that only became viable after the implementation of this extermination zone strategy. What Ukraine has managed to establish around Kupiansk resembles a permanent aerial barrier based on drones, specifically designed to neutralize Russian forces before they even reach direct contact. The Institute for the Study of War also notes that this strategy could be strengthened by expanding the depth of the extermination zones. If Ukraine manages to deny the use of Russian vehicles at distances of up to 50 kilometers from the line of contact, the effectiveness of enemy infiltrations would be drastically reduced. This limitation would force Russian infantry to advance on foot along long and unviable routes, sharply increasing the number of casualties even before the start of any organized attack. Ukraine has been integrating the massive use of drones with coordinated air and artillery strikes, increasing pressure on Russian troops and equipment both at and behind the lines of contact. This combination creates a continuous combat environment in which any enemy concentration or movement becomes vulnerable to multiple vectors of attack. While Russia seeks to prevent the recapture of occupied territories, it is also the side sustaining the offensive posture of the conflict. In practice, these movements lead soldiers directly into Ukrainian extermination zones, where losses tend to be inevitable. By employing unmanned systems on a large scale, Ukrainian forces are able to position small groups of soldiers behind these extermination zones with greater safety. Ukrainian platforms such as the Bulava and Ram 2X drones have sufficient range to operate at distances of up to 100 kilometers, equivalent to about 62 miles. This, in turn, opens space for Ukrainian troops to carry out more effective counterattacks, exploiting gaps created by the prior neutralization of Russian defenses. Even so, it is on the defensive side that the so-called Ukrainian drone walls demonstrate their greatest value, and this has become Kyiv's central focus. If Ukraine manages to sustain and expand this model, as assessed by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, the impact could be decisive for the course of the conflict. To support this strategy, the priority is clear, ensuring a massive and continuous supply of drones available for operations. In this regard, Ukraine appears to have anticipated the challenge. The country has invested billions of dollars in the production and acquisition of short-range drones designed to saturate extermination zones. Ukraine is not only accelerating innovation, but doing so on an industrial scale, indicating that drones have ceased to be a complementary resource and have taken on a central role in the conduct of the war. If this new technology-based defensive doctrine is applied efficiently, the model seen in Kupiansk may cease to be an exception and begin to spread across large regions of the country. It combines constant surveillance, psychological attrition, restricted mobility, and precision strikes, continuously undermining Russian efforts and frustrating the Kremlin's strategic objectives step by step. It is a layered defense, in which the use of terrain in Ukraine's favor is the key factor. As movement becomes slow and cautious, it is not uncommon to encounter ahead the burned-out remains of vehicles destroyed in previous attempts. These wrecks scattered across the landscape serve as silent markers of the failure of those who previously tried to cross the extermination zone and did not succeed. In theory, this labyrinth of obstacles can be crossed with extreme caution. There are passages that appear safe, narrow corridors that give the impression of offering a viable route. The problem is that these gaps are deliberate. They funnel the enemy along controlled paths, compressing them between mines and wire, with no room to maneuver or retreat. That is when the unmistakable sound emerges, the growing buzz of an FPV drone. Even if one is avoided or shot down, others soon appear, often from different angles. At that moment, it becomes clear that every step had been observed from the very beginning. This is what defines an extermination zone. Not just drones, but an integrated system of surveillance, obstacles, and traps. Now, it becomes easier to understand why the hellish landscapes created by Ukraine around the city are destroying up to 88% of Russian forces. Drones hunt soldiers, the wounded are left to die due to the extreme difficulty of evacuation, and the delivery of ammunition, food, and water to troops in combat becomes nearly impossible. Russia is now trying to adapt to the extermination zones that are already contributing significantly to the high number of Russian casualties. After all, Ukraine now controls 90% of Kupiansk and is achieving a casualty ratio of 27-1 against Russia. This city may serve as a direct warning to Putin about what awaits his forces in the future, as extermination zones continue to expand across Ukraine.